Hello, all, and welcome. Coaching for Transformation series is back with another segment. I'm Dario Minaya, and I'm here with Susan Minaya, Executive Coach, Leadership Strategist, and Learning and Development Expert. Over the last several episodes, we have been talking about leadership, culture, capability, and, of course, AI. We explored how organizations need to think differently about the human side of transformation. Today, we are beginning a new three-part series on a leadership concept that may be new to some people, but is becoming increasingly relevant for the world we are leading in now. This series is called Regenerative Leadership, Why It Matters Today. Stay tuned to learn more. Susan, we are back.
We are back.
We are
fun
back.
topic. I'm
It
excited.
is. I know. You've been talking about this for a little bit now.
I know.
So let's dive into it. Let's start with the most basic question. What is regenerative leadership?
Well, I think that's really the right place to start because the word regenerative can sound kind of abstract at first. So when people hear it, they might think about maybe sustainability or the environment or social impact. And those connections are actually real. But regenerative leadership is also very much about how we lead people, teams, organizations, and also systems. And really, Dario, before we get too far in, I also want to acknowledge my partner in this work, Dr. Nancy Zentis. Nancy brings really a deep expertise in organizational development, leadership development, and systems change. So the regenerative leadership work that we've been shaping together reflects both of our disciplines, leadership development, coaching, OD, systems thinking, and applied organizational impact. So Nancy's going to be joining us later, as you know, in the series when we talk more about this work and it comes to life and practice. At its heart, I'll go back to your question. Regenerative leadership asks a bigger question than traditional leadership development does. Traditional leadership development often focuses on the individual leader. How do I become a better communicator? How do I influence? How do I make decisions? How do I manage change? How do I perform effectively? And those are really important questions. There's nothing wrong with that, but where do we go next, right? And regenerative leadership expands that frame. It asks, how do we create the conditions for people, teams, organizations, communities, and future generations to thrive? That is a very different level of leadership.
So it's not about replacing individual leadership development, right? But it is expanding it.
Exactly. I would not say that we leave individual leadership behind. That's super important for leaders to be self-aware. They still need that. But they also need emotional intelligence. They need the communication skills, the adaptability, the courage, and also the accountability that they learn in leadership courses. But the challenges leaders are facing today aren't only individual challenges. They're system challenges, as you know, and we've talked about this before. Leaders right now today are dealing with workforce strain, constant change, social complexity. Think about it. It's like a polycrisis, right? We had that conversation in a prior session. Just imagine all the things that are coming at leaders today, and they go beyond short-term business performance. So if leadership development only focuses on making an individual leader more effective, we miss something very important. And I think regenerative leadership moves us from a purely I orientation to a stronger we orientation. It's not only how do I lead well, it's about how do we collectively build capacity and make better decisions together, strengthen the system that we're part of. How do we create an impact that can last beyond one leader, one team, and one initiative?
Well, that sounds like a very different leadership mindset.
It is. It's big, to think about it. It's almost overwhelming sometimes, but it's really not the principles, I think, once you get into it. And I think that's why it matters now. A lot of leadership development is still carrying that shadow of the heroic leader model. I can do it. The idea that if we can just make one leader more decisive or a better leader, then the organization's going to get better. And sometimes it does. But today's challenges are just way too complex for heroic leadership alone. We need leaders who can build trust, engage multiple perspectives, develop others, and this is so important, think systemically, and create the conditions where everybody can thrive and become something bigger than their own role or function. And that's the shift from I to we.
So you mentioned that regenerative leadership connects to sustainability and social impact. Can you give us some of the background without making it too academic?
Yeah, sure. Yes, because I think the background helps, but we don't need to turn it into a lecture. So regenerative thinking has roots in sustainability, ecology, systems thinking, and organizational development. I mean, that does sound academic, but it's true. In nature, regeneration means what when you hear that word?
Restoration,
Yeah,
life.
renewal. It
Yeah.
means restoring life, energy, and capacity. And I think that's what people kind of have to hang on to. It's not about sustaining what exists, it's about creating the conditions for ongoing renewal. When we bring that into leadership, we begin asking, are our leadership practices depleting people or are they actually strengthening our capacity? And, what about our organization? Are we getting energy from people and communities or are they creating value that can be sustained over time? That's where this becomes very relevant to business leaders.
So it's not just about being nice, right? Or socially conscious.
Yeah.
It is about whether the system can keep producing healthy results.
Yeah, it actually has to do with results. That's a really big point. But yes, that's it. A depleted system might still perform well for a while, but if the way we lead is constantly depleting our trust, our energy, especially our creativity and commitment, eventually the system has to pay a price for that. Regenerative leadership asks leaders to pay attention to what their leadership is producing over time. Is it producing dependency, exhaustion, maybe fear? And what about short term compliance, right? So, in the long haul, it can't be sustainable. So, I think what we have to look at is how are we creating capacity and ownership and learning and trusting one another in the organization and making the environment sustainable? That's a very practical business question.
Now, you and Dr. Nancy Zentis have also connected this work to the SDGs and the IDGs.
Mhm.
Now, for someone who may not know those terms, how would you explain that connection?
Sure. The SDGs, also known as the Sustainable Development Goals, they were developed by the United Nations as a global framework for some of the major challenges facing society today. Things like health and well being, quality, education, decent work, reduced inequities among people and social situations, climate action. Creating strong institutions and just responsible consumption in our environment. Now, an organization does not have to be working directly on global policy for those goals to matter. Many of those themes show up inside organizations every day. If you think about the purpose of organizations, think of healthcare, think about health and well being, right? So, most organizations could tie into one of these sustainability goals and they keep coming up, right? But the sobering realizations around them is that having those goals hasn't really been enough. And these are trying to reach goals by 2030, but they figured out we're not getting there fast enough. We're not going to be able to make it. And then what they really realize is that a part of the realization is that they can't achieve these broader SDGs unless they start figuring out how to build the inner and collective capacity to act on them in our leaders, right? That's where the IDGs or inner development goals come in. The IDGs ask, what human capacities do leaders, teams, organizations, and communities actually need in order to respond to complexity and contribute to these larger goals, right? So they realize they had a capacity challenge with
Mhm.
leaders in the organization. And that's where this becomes very relevant for leadership development. Because if we want leaders to respond to complex challenges, they need more than technical expertise to be able to do it. And then, they really have to learn how to have a collective leadership approach. And we're going to talk about that.
So the SDGs name some of the larger external challenges, and the IDGs point to the inner and collective capacities leaders need to respond.
Exactly. And that's a good way to say it, Dario. So thank you. You should have just said it. And that connection is important because it's going to bring leadership development into a larger context. Regenerative leadership says leadership isn't about achieving goals only, right? It's also about how we achieve them. Who gets impacted? What capacity are we building along the way? And what kind of future are we helping to create? And that may sound really lofty and pie in the sky, but it becomes very practical when you apply it to a real leadership challenge. For example, if a leader wants to improve retention, regenerative leadership would not only ask what program can we put into place, because that's very short term. It would
Mm.
say what conditions are causing people to engage? What relationships need to be strengthened? What voices have we not heard? This begins to move into appreciative inquiry, right? So we start noticing patterns in the organization and figuring out through that how we create a better system to offset the retention problem. And that's a deeper leadership conversation.
Now, I can imagine someone hearing this and saying, "This sounds interesting, but is it practical?"
Hmm.
So, how would you respond to that?
I would say it's very practical when it's designed well, right? So regenerative leader isn't a philosophy, and I think it's a way of developing leaders to think and act differently in real situations. And that means leaders aren't just learning concepts. They're actually working on actual challenges that are real in their workplace. They're looking at their stakeholders, they're noticing patterns in their own organizations. So they're applying this leadership principles through regenerative leadership into actual work that they're doing in their own organizations. In traditional leadership development, we sometimes teach a model and hope leaders apply it. In regenerative leadership, the work becomes more applied. The leader is developing while working on something that's relevant and important to them. And anybody who knows me knows that's the kind of programming I like to do, right? Because it's relevant. And that's one of the reasons Nancy and I have been so interested in this space, because it brings together leadership development, coaching, organizational development, systems thinking, and actual real world application.
So it's not leadership development as an event,
No.
right? It is leadership development as a way of engaging real work.
Sure, because I mean, you learn the principles, but then you have to extend that work into your work environment, right? So that matters because, today leaders are so overwhelmed. I work with organizations all the time where the leaders are like, how much more can you ask me to do, And they don't need more abstract concepts basically on a PowerPoint slide. They need developmental experiences that help them lead differently in the complexities that they're facing. And regenerative leadership gives a frame for that.
So let's connect this to your audience.
Mm-hmm.
Why should HR, L&D, OD, and leadership development leaders be paying attention to regenerative leadership?
Because these leaders are often responsible for helping organizations build the leadership capacity that's needed for the future. Look at the velocity of change that we have experienced in the last 5 years. Look at from 10 years ago. It continues to be amplified. I see so much burnout. And I think many of them know that the old formulas aren't enough. They can't keep putting leaders through the same kind of programs and expect them to be prepared for the level of complexity we're facing now. It's a lot. So leaders are seeing the strain in the system, and also they see that they're tired, they're stretched. They see these cultural issues that are not solved by another communication cascade. They see change fatigue. They see the limits of siloed thinking. And history offers countless examples. You look at companies like Kodak, Nokia, BlackBerry. What about our favorite Blockbuster? Remember? And Sears. These were once industry leaders, but they struggled to adapt as markets and technologies and customer expectations evolved, And so just think, even with things like PayPal and Nike, like even market leaders like Tesla already have experienced really significant declines in shareholder value after periods of extraordinary success. Why did that happen? These organizations are not lacking in talent or resources. Rather, they illustrate how quickly competitive advantage can erode when leaders focus on optimizing today's business instead of preparing for tomorrow's realities. So the organizations that flourish in the future aren't simply going to be the ones with the most advanced technology or the biggest market share. They'll be those that continuously learn to adapt and innovate and regenerate themselves. And this requires a fundamentally different approach to leadership. So regenerative leadership is offering a broader development frame for leaders.
So this is not separate from business performance. It is connected to it.
Oh, it's very connective. And, if we want organizations to perform sustainability, they have to know how to create the conditions for sustainability and get the outcomes that they're looking for so that the business thrives, right? So I think that's the leadership challenge. And that's why regenerative leadership belongs in the leadership development conversation today.
So if you had to give people a simple definition to hold on to, right, what would it be?
I would say regenerative leadership is a practice of leading in a way that strengthens the capacity of people, of teams, organizations, communities, and systems so that they can thrive over time. It's about creating conditions for renewal, not just extracting performance, right? Even though results are important, but that's not the total goal. And it's also about moving from individual effectiveness to collective capacity. And it's about helping leaders understand that the way they lead either depletes the system or it's going to strengthen it. And that's really the heart of it.
That's pretty clear, honestly. I mean, and the idea that leadership either depletes or strengthens the system is a strong one.
I think it's important because every leader leaves a wake.
Mm.
It's like the odor in the room when you leave. Whatever they leave behind, people feel it, So people may feel more clear, more capable, more connected, or they might feel confused, depleted, unwilling to engage. And regenerative leadership invites leaders to pay attention to that wake that they're leaving, not in a self critical way, but in a responsible way, because leadership isn't about only what we get done, it's about what we also make possible for other people.
I really like how that came there. And, Susan, as we close this first episode, what do you want people to take away?
I would want them to take away that, well, regenerative leadership is not a buzzword and it is not just a sustainability concept. It's a leadership development response to the world that we're leading in today. Organizations need leaders who can think beyond their own effectiveness as an individual and begin building collective capacity and sustainable impact in healthier systems of work. And that's a collaborative effort. I think for HR, learning and development, OD, and leadership development leaders, this is an opportunity to expand the leadership conversation, because the future of leadership development can't only be about making individual leaders more effective. It has to be about helping leaders create conditions where people, teams, organizations, and communities can thrive.
And honestly, that really sets up the series beautifully because, in our next episode, we're going to talk about why regenerative leadership matters now, especially in a world shaped by complexity, disruption, workforce strain, and shared responsibility.
Yep.
Susan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dario.
And to our listeners, thank you all for tuning in. Until next time.